Hey, Paul.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Great, great. Now that the Canadian fires, the
Yeah,
smog has passed, I think we're both breathing a little easier,
definitely.
literally.
People might hear the little raspiness in my voice. It kind of got me for a few days, kind of coughing up a lung, but I think we're on the up and up.
Well, I was thinking, I could go biking or I could just smoke some cigarettes. I'm almost a never smoker, but maybe this is the time to start
Which one's more tempting?
biking. But if it's equivalent, you know.
Well, I have this great image in my head of you just zooming down on a mountain bike with like two cigarettes in both hands. Not the right place to be talking about this,
No,
but yeah.
we
This
have
is
to.
another episode of the Cancer Letter podcast with Sara Willa Ernst and Paul Goldberg. And Jacqueline is out today, but I think we are going to man the ship good. Why don't we go through this week's issue?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Yeah, so on the cover of last week's issue, we had the directors. This was an amazing conversation that Paul had with Karen Knudsen, who is the CEO of the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy, and also Kent Tolke, who's the founder and CEO of Paradigm Health. And they were talking about artificial intelligence and what that's going to mean for specifically clinical trial infrastructure. So if you want to listen more to that conversation, we got an entire podcast out that's ready for y'all. But other than that, the second story was a story that I wrote, a B story, about an FDA guidance on psychedelics. And so this is kind of some follow-up coverage from a previous cover story a few weeks ago about psychedelics and how federal policy is changing around something that has really been kind of locked up and criminalized and ignored by the federal government for decades. Other than that, we had a story about what's happening at OMB and some of the changes that they're trying to make when it comes to research infrastructure. Claire wrote that story, and it's a big compilation of nearly 500,000 comments that the federal government received in response to some of the changes that they're proposing. And so if you want to read what ASCO has said, what AACR has said, what the National Breast Cancer Coalition has said, AACI, it's all there, and it'll give you a sense of really what people are thinking in response to the proposal. We had one sponsored article and we also had a guest editorial. The guest editorial was called Cancer Progress is Not Reaching Everyone. Native Nations Must Be Part of the Solution. And the sponsored content, that article was The Future of Oncology. Early Career Scientists Need Mentorship and a New Academic Model. So it is a chocked full issue, but I think we're really going to just dive into the story that I wrote and Paul helped edit. And that one was about psychedelics specifically.
All right, let's do psychedelics.
The FDA is looking at psychedelics as a potential treatment for anxiety and depression, as well as substance abuse disorders. And this is of interest to psycho-oncologists that have been looking into this question for at least 2 decades around cancer-related anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Could psilocybin specifically be a treatment to help cancer patients and cancer survivors deal with just the kind of psychological distress that comes from a cancer diagnosis? And so the final guidance came out and apparently was pretty similar to the draft guidance. And there were some thoughts by my sources and the people that I reached out to. I think the big thing was this question around the psychotherapy component that goes with psilocybin or other types of psychedelics. Usually it's not just the drug, but there is this preparation session that you'll have with a therapist and also an integration session to help you.
Can I get in? Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question of when you're really dealing with drug approval, how do you work in issues such as talking therapy? I mean, when do you require it? How do you require it? On what basis do you require it? How does it fall under the rubric of practice of medicine? How did that work out in the story?
Yeah, I mean, FDA does not regulate psychotherapy. And I think a lot of the sources, the clinical trialists I talked to said, admittedly, this is kind of a weird space for FDA to approve or not approve. FDA responded to it in a way that I think generated some concern by the mostly academic sources that I talked to. They see that psychotherapy is a very crucial component. And if they were to hypothesize why this therapy, they've seen signs that this therapy works, it's because of this pairing of psilocybin plus psychotherapy.
Actually, this would be a good spot to read some of the comments you got. What did your sources say?
This is one of my favorite quotes in the story. It's by Stacy Fisher, who works at the University of Colorado Cancer Center. And she said, if you asked me to hypothesize mechanistically about how psilocybin works to improve psychological distress associated with a serious cancer diagnosis, I would say it's the combination. The therapy works well because of a period of neuroplasticity, openness, and cognitive flexibility related to the psilocybin. So she very much sees it as an important combination to maintain.
Interesting. Any other quotes? Anything else on the story?
Yeah, I mean, Stacy Fisher wasn't the only one trying to protect the psychotherapy component. Folks at UCSF, the Translational Psychedelic Research Program, they had sent some comments during the 2023 draft guidance. Also, Johns Hopkins University and the Ohio State University, all kind of echoing the same thing, that this psychotherapy component is very crucial. But FDA is a little bit more skeptical around it.
Well, that's their job, right? And they do regulate drugs. And psychotherapy is not a drug. I mean, psychiatric drugs are used, and they are used sometimes with talk therapy. So I just wonder how that works in psychiatry, because they do. FDA, the agency does approve psychiatric drugs. So how does that work statistically? And
I think in a lot of ways, this is untrekked territory, and there's not a lot of drugs that, the protocols in these clinical trials are specifically with the psychotherapy component. Usually it's just that one isolated variable of the drug.
Mm-hmm. How soon do you think they're going to approve or have an approval decision or on the first of those drugs? I think two of them, right, are on the National Priority Voucher Program, which is a short track.
Yeah. So this is kind of part of an entire policy change from the Trump administration. They had issued an executive order a few months ago, which is what the cover story that I wrote and the cover story that you edited was about. And they had issued 3 national priority vouchers, 2 for psilocybin, for major depressive disorder and also treatment-resistant depression, and then 1 for a drug called methylone for post-traumatic stress disorder. In terms of the timeline of the approvals, I'm not sure, but the fact that they had been issued national priority vouchers, I think, is a sign of interest. And specifically in the executive order, they use the word accelerate. So it seems like speed is something that the Trump administration is concerned with. The UK Markey Cancer Centre makes cancer-free tomorrows possible through discoveries and innovations made today. From precision therapies to innovative clinical trials, we're here not only to bring you the best treatments available, but to help advance cancer care across the Commonwealth and beyond. And we're doing it right here in Kentucky. Hope lives here, and so does a community dedicated to helping you move forward with strength, clarity, and compassion. To learn more or request an appointment, visit ukhealth.com/marquee.
Well, what we probably ought to do, and this is kind of probably where we should have started the conversation, is a recap of the history of what's been happening. Because this is not your standard bring your drug to FDA situation. This is more of a question of, manosphere. Joe Rogan doing a lengthy podcast about psychedelic drugs, which by itself doesn't really matter much, because both both you and I missed it, and I suspect a lot of people who listen to this podcast missed it as well. But what happened next is Trump was brought into this by Rogan, right? And he says, well, what do you want me to do, approve a drug? Which is kind of an amazing thing to say. And then there's this discussion. But the reason these drugs were never really submitted to FDA, and the reason there hasn't been a whole lot of research, is because of the Nixon war on drugs. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
50 years of policy being upended, maybe appropriately. Who are we to say we're just dog-faced journalists?
Yeah, I mean, it's very out of character how this federal policy change made. This is kind of the top of the cover story that I wrote, but it, to set a scene, Joe Rogan sent a text to President Trump and told him about the treatment potential of ibogaine when it comes to alcoholism. And this came after an 2-hour long interview that Joe Rogan did with former Texas Governor Rick Perry, who's become a total advocate for ibogaine. And so essentially, yeah, like a guy with a podcast does an interview and then has friends in high places and texts the president, and president says, do you want an FDA approval? And so that was all mentioned at the press conference in the Oval Office, and gives some context just about how federal policy is made in 2026.
So let's back up a little more. So basically you have a podcast, then you have a text message, then you have a national priority voucher by FDA.
Exactly.
And then now you have an FDA guidance for drug approvals for how to prepare the drug approval applications, the NDAs. So that's where we are, and we'll be on it for quite a bit longer. But anything we missed? Anything you wanted to add to this?
I think, in the FDA final guidance that just came out, the story that we just wrote, FDA expresses this hesitation or skepticism around the importance of the psychotherapy component with psilocybin or a different psychedelic drug. And essentially they're saying we want really strong evidence to show that the psychotherapy component is efficacious. And what they ended up suggesting in the final guidance is something called factorial design. Factorial design, basically, there's 4 arms: placebo and intensive therapy, placebo and minimal/no therapy, active drug and intensive therapy, and the last one is active drug and minimal or no therapy. And talking to the clinical trialists, they're very supportive of this. They feel like it'll answer a lot of questions that have gone unanswered. Is there a difference between 2 hours of therapy versus 4 hours of therapy? How intense and how often does the therapy really need to occur in order to really kind of refine the protocols? The downside of that is that factorial design is usually expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, is there money enough in these drugs that somebody might want to do this kind of drug? By the way, how many patients do you think we're talking about here?
For cancer patients or just in general?
Well, actually, yeah, indications are not uniform. This is really a lot of methodologists are having a lot of fun deciphering this. How do you go forward with this? Could be very interesting.
Yeah. I think it's unclear at this moment whether a factorial design trial will happen because of the resources that are required, and especially because FDA has opened the door to, at least in the final guidance, to applications that kind of de-emphasize the psychotherapy aspect. So, that might be a whole lot cheaper for a pharmaceutical company that is trying to bring a drug to market, to go in that direction, as opposed to the real hefty lift of a factorial design trial.
It might be very interesting to see how this is discussed. Maybe a story can be done by calling our friends who design trials and asking them what their thinking is about this, because it's not something that's intuitive. it could be a very interesting story about how to combine what we know about this with what FDA does to approve drugs. So, kind of what to expect. It might be a very interesting story. Do you think?
You're assigning me a story right now.
I'm not assigning you. So I'm thinking about a story, thinking through it, and it would be good to have your thoughts on this. I think it would be a really worthwhile exercise to look at how to design those trials that are in the in the guidance, in the final guidance. And this is the final guidance, so it's you should take it seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's the final guidance. I would be very interested in that, and it sounds like we have more follow up reporting to do.
Yeah, well, it's an ongoing story, and it's one of those things where the cancer letter has always done the same thing, which is we go back, go back, go back as how many times we need to just follow up, and we're done when we say we're done. So, in this case, it's a story people will be seeing a lot of. And personally, as an editor, I would love to see a story about how to interpret that guidance, how how clinical trials methodology experts look at this. You know, how somebody like maybe Don Barry looks at it. I'm just throwing out one name, but there are others. How they kind of look at this and say, "Hey, we can do this trial," or "Hey, no, they're hallucinating." Appropriate joke here, ha ha ha. Is FDA hallucinating? And is it a good thing that it is? If it is,
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like I have more reporting to do ahead of me.
oh my God, you'll have a blast. Some of the coolest people in the world design clinical trials.
Yeah, there's definitely an art and a science to it.
Well, let's stay with the science.
The science, yeah.
So anyway, what else did we have that was fun to do? Let's talk about the OMB guidance. Half a million responses, comments to this OMB document, OMB proposal. That's quite amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. And it was in a pretty short period of time, right?
Oh yeah.
It's just flooded in.
Well, it wasn't spontaneous. It was supposed to.
Did anything kind of jump out to you in terms of the comments in the story?
No, well, the comments are terrific, all of them. Uh, the part that, and the fact that they arrived as they arrived is really terrific. And I just thought, assigning the story, that it would be important for people to be able to find commentaries, comments by various organizations. So we put together a list, and it's kind of like having an index to a telephone book. It would save some time, but to me, this is probably one of the most important changes to be proposed in how clinical trials are conducted, because really it goes back to World War II, when the U.S. government first became interested in supporting science, and that's really the beginning of it all. Vannevar Bush came up with this idea of the kind of reliance on peer review. So if we do not rely on peer review, gosh, what do we rely on? Political review, hierarchies. Well, we do have scientific hierarchies, but I think a decision was made that having those scientific hierarchies, which can be busted up pretty well, is better than having political hierarchies. That's kind of the story, and I don't think we're done with that either. Because what's the administration going to do with this now? They have 500,000 comments. The clock is ticking. October 1st is when they would like to get this enacted. Of course, it's going to be challenged in courts. Of course, it's going to be challenged in Congress. Interesting part would be how the party lines align on this. So far, it's Dems against, some vast majority Republicans for, but that too can change. So Susan Collins has been against it, which is hugely important. And the question is, does she survive the midterms? So the whole thing is going to be, another one of those sagas that we cover and cover and cover, or I should say Odyssey, that we cover and cover and cover, or the whole Megillah that we cover and cover. In any case, it's something we'll cover and cover and cover.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important to our readers. I mean, that's clear in just, I'm sure many of them had contributed to the comments themselves. And yeah, I mean, I see the OMB story being a story that is going to continue on and on for months to come. And we will be on top of all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I wanted to dive in a little bit into the sponsor article that's titled "The Future of Oncology: Early Career Scientists Need Mentorship and a New Academic Model." This was written by Marcel Vandenbrink. He's with City of Hope. And I thought it was a pretty interesting article. Did anything kind of pop out to you specifically, Paul, when you were reading it?
Yeah. It's really a story about how do you protect our biggest resource and most important resource, and really the hope for the future, which is young investigators, early career investigators. How do you keep them working? And one of the issues is, of course, one-on-one mentorship. That's huge because, think of all the things in our careers, and we're not scientists, that matter the most. It's the one-on-one mentorship by somebody who is more senior in your career. Once that's lost, there's no way back. That's not Marcel speaking, it's me. But the other bit that's interesting is that the system, the existing academic model, encouraged kind of solo researchers.
Yeah. He calls it the solo investigator model in the story.
Yeah, the lone wolves out there. Maybe that's the wrong image, but you can't. Yeah, so it encouraged that, and what's happening now is a more collaborative world where research is done more collaboratively, and maybe there is a way to recognize this in the way young researchers, early career investigators are being encouraged to stay in there, to keep it going, because the world does change, He
talks about in the article, just where the incentives and where the rewards are set up in the solo investigator model. If you're a young investigator, to be first author or last author on a paper is the goal. It's where you're trying to go, and trying to acquire or to be awarded an individual grant. Those are where the rewards and the incentives are set up, and encourages people to do more individual solo work. And so I think the author is kind of questioning, how do we build a system that it rewards people for collaborative work instead of solo work?
Yeah, there is a reason there is a time. This is a good time to re-engineer, to think in those kind of very broad terms and the fundamentals. So I found that piece very interesting. So.
Yeah. And you kind of mentioned this. Some of the ideas are a little universal. They definitely apply in scientific research, but they apply to journalism for us as well. As a younger journalist, wanting to have that type of mentorship and wanting to work collaboratively and soaking everything up is exactly what I crave. So I relate a lot.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is definitely an interesting piece that resonates in the newsrooms. Which, of course, that's not Marcel's intent.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, great. Thank you so much. This is a great time to be a journalist, isn't it, Sara?
Yeah. And I think that's how we end every podcast, is us just saying, thank you for letting us do the work that we do.
Well, thank you. And thanks for listening.